Single dad was tricked into a blind date by twins, but what she said left him in tears. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Trevor Dawson walked into Elliott Bay Cafe in downtown Seattle on April 15th at 6:30 in the evening, thinking he was meeting a potential client about a major electrical job. And he was wearing his work jeans with paint stains on them and a flannel shirt that had seen better days because he'd come straight from a job site and hadn't had time to change. His buddy Coach Rivera, who coached his daughter Maddie's soccer team, had texted him that morning saying he had a referral for him, someone who needed extensive electrical work done on their house. And Trevor needed the money badly enough that he'd agreed to meet on a Friday evening, even though he was exhausted from working a 12-hour day. He scanned the restaurant looking for someone who looked like they might be a homeowner needing electrical work, and his eyes landed on a woman sitting alone at a table by the window, looking just as confused as he felt. And she was dressed nice, like she was meeting someone important. And she kept checking her phone every 10 seconds like she was nervous about something. Trevor figured she probably wasn't his client, but he walked over anyway because the hostess was pointing at that table. And when he got close, he said, "Excuse me, are you here about the electrical work?" And the woman looked up at him with these tired brown eyes and said, "What? No, I'm waiting for someone. A setup. My brothers are trying to play matchmaker." Trevor felt his face get hot because clearly he was at the wrong table. And he said, "Sorry, my mistake. I'm supposed to be meeting someone about a job." And he was about to walk away when the woman said, "Wait, what's your name?" And Trevor said, "Trevor Dawson. I'm an electrician." And the woman's mouth fell open, and she said, "Oh my God, I'm Paige. Paige Hartwell. My brothers told me I was meeting someone named Trevor for a blind date." They both just stood there staring at each other for a solid 10 seconds before Trevor pulled out his phone and showed her the text from Coach Rivera that said, "Meet at Elliott Bay Cafe, 6:30, table by the window. Her name's Paige. She needs electrical work done. Good woman, single mom. Give her a chance." Paige pulled out her phone and showed him a text from someone named Evan that said, "Blind date tonight, 6:30 p.m. at Elliott Bay Cafe. His name is Trevor. He's a single dad with a 6-year-old daughter. Please just give him one chance. Do this for us." Trevor looked between the phones and said, "I think we've been set up, like actually tricked into being here." And Paige put her face in her hands and said, "I'm going to absolutely murder my brothers. This is so embarrassing. I'm so sorry you got dragged into whatever scheme they cooked up." They were both about to leave when a waiter appeared with a plate of appetizers and said, "Compliments of Evan and Ethan Hartwell. They called ahead and paid for your entire meal tonight." And there was a note attached to the plate that said, "Please stay. Just talk for 1 hour. We promise it'll be worth it. We love you, Paige." Signed E&E. Paige looked at Trevor with this mortified expression and said, "I don't even know what to say right now. My 17-year-old twin brothers apparently think they're professional matchmakers." And Trevor said, "Wait, your brothers are 17 and they set this whole thing up? That's actually kind of impressive in a completely inappropriate way." Trevor sat down across from her because he figured he was already there, and the food smelled amazing. And he said, "Who are Evan and Ethan exactly, and why are they so invested in your love life?" Paige sighed and said, "They're my twin brothers. Well, technically, I raised them. Our parents died in a house fire when the twins were 8 years old and I was 23. So I became their legal guardian, and I've been their mom ever since." Trevor felt his chest get tight because that was the kind of sacrifice he understood on a deep level. And he said, "You've been raising teenage twin boys since you were 23. That's 9 years. How did you even manage that?" Paige started telling him the whole story about how she'd been fresh out of community college when their parents died, how she'd had a full scholarship to a fancy nursing school that she'd turned down to keep the twins in their hometown and in their same school, how she'd worked as a CNA during the day and finished her nursing degree part-time at night over 7 years instead of 4. She said, "I'm a pediatric ER nurse now at Seattle Children's Hospital. The twins are seniors in high school and they both got full ride scholarships to University of Washington. They're leaving for college in September, and I think that's why they're doing this whole matchmaking thing. They're worried I'm going to be alone when they leave." Trevor said, "That's actually really sweet in a meddling kind of way." And then he told her about himself, about how he'd been married to his wife Jenna, and she died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving him to raise their daughter Maddie, who was 6 years old now. He said, I run a small electrical contracting business, which is a fancy way of saying I fix people's wiring and try not to electrocute myself. And I haven't dated since Jenna died because honestly, I've been too busy and too scared. And Maddie's been asking every woman we meet if she wants to be her new mom, which is absolutely mortifying. They talked for 20 minutes about being single parents and the guilt and the loneliness and the exhaustion, and Trevor found himself actually enjoying the conversation in a way he hadn't enjoyed talking to anyone in 2 years. Paige's phone rang right in the middle of her telling a story about the twins accidentally flooding the bathroom, and she looked at the screen and said, It's Evan. I'm going to answer this on speaker so he can hear exactly what I think about his little scheme. And she hit the button. Evan's voice came through the phone saying, Are you still there or did you leave already? Ethan owes me $20 if you stayed. And Paige said, I'm here with Trevor, who is not a potential client needing electrical work. We've been comparing notes on how we both got tricked into this. And Evan started laughing and said, Ethan, I told you she'd figure it out immediately. You owe me money. There was background noise, and then another voice that must have been Ethan yelling, Tell her we're sorry, but also not sorry at all. Paige said, Why would you do this? Why would you trick both of us into coming here? And Evan got quiet for a second, and then his voice came back different, more serious and a little bit shaky. And he said, Because you deserve this, Paige, you've given us absolutely everything. You gave up your whole life to raise us, and you've never once complained. We're leaving for college in 4 months, and we wanted you to have someone so you're not alone when we're gone. Trevor watched Paige's eyes fill up with tears, and she said, Evan, in this broken voice. And Evan said, Just give him a chance, okay? We vetted him. He's a good guy. We love you. And then he hung up before she could respond. Paige wiped her eyes and said, I'm so sorry you got pulled into this. My brothers are sweet, but they're completely misguided. You didn't sign up for any of this mess. And Trevor said, Actually, my daughter has been doing pretty much the same thing, trying to find me a new wife, like it's her personal mission, so I kind of get where they're coming from. They both laughed and sat there in silence for a minute before Trevor said, Since we're already here and the food is already paid for, and we both got ambushed by well-meaning family members, do you want to just have dinner? Not as a blind date, but just as two people who understand what it's like to put everyone else first? Paige smiled for the first time all night and said, Okay, but I'm leaving a huge tip because I feel bad that your Friday night got hijacked by my scheming brothers. And Trevor said, Deal. And for the record, they did a pretty good job with the setup. I probably would have said no if someone had just asked me on a normal date. They ended up staying for 3 hours talking about everything from their kids to their jobs to their favorite terrible reality TV shows. And when they finally walked out to the parking lot at 9:30, both of them were surprised at how fast the time had gone. Trevor said, This was really nice. Like genuinely one of the best nights I've had in 2 years. Can I get your number? Like for real this time. Not because teenagers tricked us, but because I'd actually like to see you again? Paige gave him her number and they hugged goodbye, and it lasted just a little bit longer than a normal hug between strangers. And as Trevor was driving home, his phone rang with Coach Rivera's name on the screen. He answered and Coach said, So how'd it go? Did the twins' master plan work? Are you in love yet? And Trevor almost drove off the road and said, Wait, what? You were in on this. You told me she needed electrical work. Coach Rivera was laughing so hard he could barely talk, and he said, Man, those boys are smart. They came to me a month ago with this whole elaborate plan. They needed someone you'd trust to get you there, and I was honored to be part of Operation Get Paige a Boyfriend. And Trevor was laughing despite himself because he'd just been match made by two 17-year-old kids, and apparently half of Seattle was in on the scheme. He hung up and sat in his driveway for a minute, thinking about Paige's smile and the way she'd talked about her brothers with this mixture of exasperation and pure love. And he realized that maybe getting tricked into a blind date wasn't the worst thing that had ever happened to him. Trevor and Paige started seeing each other regularly after that first accidental date, meeting for coffee between her hospital shifts and his electrical jobs. And every time Trevor saw her name pop up on his phone, he felt like a teenager again, which was ridiculous for a 34-year-old widower. But he couldn't help it. By the second week, Trevor knew he wanted her to meet Maddie because his 6-year-old daughter was the most important person in his entire world. And if this was going to be something real, then Paige needed to be part of that equation. But he was nervous as hell because Maddie had this habit of asking every woman they met if she wanted to be her new mom, which was absolutely mortifying. He brought Maddie to meet Paige at a park on a Saturday afternoon in early May, and the second Maddie saw Paige, she ran up and said, "Are you my dad's girlfriend? Do you like princesses? I lost my front tooth yesterday, and the tooth fairy gave me $5 whole, all in one breath without stopping for air." Paige knelt down to Maddie's level and said, "I am your dad's friend. I love princesses, especially Moana because she's brave. And that's a very cool gap in your smile. $5 is a big deal." And just like that, Maddie was completely smitten. Maddie spent the next hour dragging Paige around the playground, showing her every single slide and swinging rock she collected. And at one point she said, "My mom died in a car crash. Do you think she can see me from heaven?" And Trevor almost intervened, but Paige handled it perfectly. She said, "I think she can see you, and I think she's really proud of how kind and smart you are." Maddie thought about that and then said, "If you marry my dad, does that mean you'll be my mom too?" And Trevor wanted to disappear into the ground. But Paige said, "That's a big question for someone you just met. How about we start with being friends first and see what happens?" The third week, Paige invited Trevor to dinner at her house so he could finally meet the infamous twins who'd orchestrated their entire relationship. And when Trevor walked through the door, he was immediately confronted by two 17-year-old boys who looked completely identical, except one was wearing a soccer jersey with the number 7, and the other had paint stains all over an old art shirt. The soccer twin stuck out his hand and said, "I'm Evan, this is Ethan. We're the masterminds behind your love life. We need to have a serious conversation." And they physically pulled Trevor into the kitchen while Paige rolled her eyes and started pulling ingredients out of the fridge. Ethan leaned against the counter and said, "Look, we did a full background check on you, talked to Coach Rivera, looked up your business reviews. You seem like a decent guy, but we need you to understand something about our sister." And Evan jumped in saying, "She's too nice. She doesn't brag about herself. She won't tell you how incredible she is. So we're going to tell you, and if you hurt her, we'll rewire your entire house wrong, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering why your lights flicker randomly." Trevor couldn't help but laugh because these kids were 17 and acting like protective fathers, and he said, "That's completely fair. I have a 6-year-old daughter, so I understand the protective energy. I respect it." Just like that, the tension broke, and Evan grinned and said, "Cool, you passed the test. Now let's talk about whether you're a Seahawks fan or not, because that's a deal breaker." And they spent the rest of dinner debating football and talking about Maddie's rock collection, and Ethan showing Trevor some of his architectural sketches. Paige watched from across the table with this soft expression, and later when Trevor was leaving, she said, "They really like you. They don't usually warm up to people that fast." And Trevor said, "They love you. That's really obvious. You did an amazing job raising them." 2 months flew by with family dinners and park dates, and Maddie getting more attached to Paige every single day. And then the twins' 18th birthday hit in late June, and they threw a backyard party with their high school friends and family. Halfway through the party, Evan and Ethan pulled Trevor aside and said they needed help moving something in the garage. But when they got out there, away from everyone, Evan's entire demeanor changed, and he said, "We need to tell you something about Paige, something she doesn't even know we found out about, and you can't tell her we told you." Trevor felt his stomach drop because that sounded like the beginning of really bad news, but Ethan said, "When our parents died in the house fire and Paige became our legal guardian, she had a full academic scholarship to Johns Hopkins Nursing School in Baltimore. It's literally one of the top 5 programs in the entire country." Evan said she was packed and ready to go, had her dorm assignment, everything, and then our parents died, and she turned it all down without even blinking. She moved us into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment and worked as a CNA making $12 an hour. Ethan's voice was shaking when he said, "She went to community college at night after working 8-hour shifts and putting us to bed. It took her 7 years to finish a bachelor's degree that should have taken 4, and she never once made us feel like we were holding her back or that she regretted choosing us." Evan had tears running down his face and he said, "We found the acceptance letter last year when we were cleaning out the attic. It was in a box with a bunch of her old college stuff, and we realized what she'd given up for us, and we couldn't handle it." Trevor felt his own throat get tight and he said, "That's why you set up the blind date. You wanted to make sure she had someone when you left for college," and both twins nodded. Ethan said, "We're leaving for University of Washington in September. We're starting our whole lives because she sacrificed hers, and we're terrified she's going to be completely alone in that house. That's why we did the whole elaborate scheme with Coach Rivera and the fake work meeting." Evans said, "We needed someone who would understand what she did, someone who gets sacrifice, and you're a single dad who lost your wife, so we figured you'd understand better than anyone." Trevor pulled both of them into a hug and said, "I promise you both, I've got her. I'm not going anywhere. She's the best thing that's happened to me since Jenna died, and I'm going to take care of her." And all three of them stood there in the garage having this emotional moment while party music played in the background. Everything got complicated in July when Trevor's in-laws, Linda and Tom, flew in from California without warning to visit Maddie because they'd been feeling guilty about not seeing her enough. And they walked into Trevor's house to find Paige sitting on the living room floor, braiding Maddie's hair while Moana played on the TV. Linda's face went completely cold and she said, "Trevor, can we speak to you in the kitchen, please?" In that tone that meant she was about to lose it, and after awkward introductions, Paige took Maddie outside to the backyard to give them privacy. Linda didn't even wait for the door to close before she said, "You're already dating someone. Jenna hasn't even been gone 3 years, and you've replaced her with some girl who looks like she's barely out of college." And Trevor felt his blood pressure spike. He said, "She's 32 years old and she raised her twin brothers alone from the time she was 23 after their parents died. She's not replacing anyone. I'm trying to move forward with my life and be happy, and Jenna would want that for me and for Maddie. She literally told me that before she died." Tom said, "This seems really fast, Trevor. You barely know this woman. What if it doesn't work out and Maddie gets attached and loses another mother figure?" And Trevor said, "I know she's kind and patient, and she doesn't try to erase Jenna's memory. I know Maddie lights up when she's around. I know she understands what it means to sacrifice everything for the people you love. That's enough for me to know this is real." Linda softened just a tiny bit and said, "We just don't want to see Maddie hurt again, or you hurt again. You've both been through so much already." Later that evening, Linda found Paige in the kitchen washing dishes and said, "I need to know you're not trying to erase my daughter from their lives." And Paige turned around and looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Maddie talks about Jenna every single day. She tells me stories about baking cookies and playing dress up. And I encourage all of it because Jenna is her mother and always will be. I'm not trying to replace her. I'm just trying to add something good to their lives." Linda's eyes filled up with tears, and she hugged Paige and whispered, "Thank you for loving them both. I can see that you do." September 1st came way too fast, and Trevor went with Paige to help Evan and Ethan move into their dorms at University of Washington. And watching the twins carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs while Paige tried not to cry in front of them was one of the hardest things Trevor had ever witnessed. When it was finally time to say goodbye, Evan hugged Paige so tight she could barely breathe and said, "You did it. You got us here. Everything we are is because of what you gave us." And Ethan said, "We're only 30 minutes away. We'll come home every weekend if you need us. We love you so much." Paige held it together until she got back to her car, and then she completely fell apart, sobbing so hard she was shaking. And Trevor followed her back to her house and found her sitting on the couch in the living room that used to be filled with teenage boy chaos and video game controllers, and now was just quiet and empty. She said, "I don't know who I am without them. For 9 years I've been mom, and now I'm just Paige, and I don't even remember what that means. What do I do with all this time? What's my purpose now?" Trevor sat next to her and pulled her into his arms and said, "Your purpose is whatever you want it to be. You get to figure out who Paige is when she's not in mom mode, and you're not alone in this because you've got me and Maddie and we're not going anywhere. We're your family now, too." They sat there for a long time until Paige's breathing evened out, and Trevor thought about how this woman had given up everything for 2 8-year-old boys And now those boys had given her back a future by tricking her into a blind date. By November, they'd settled into this rhythm where Paige was at Trevor's house more nights than her own. And when Thanksgiving rolled around, Trevor invited Paige and the twins, who were home for the holiday, to his big family dinner with his parents and sister, and all his nieces and nephews, and even Linda and Tom, who'd flown in from California. Paige walked into Trevor's childhood home and was immediately overwhelmed by the chaos of kids running around and multiple conversations happening and the smell of turkey filling the entire house. And Trevor's mom pulled her into a hug and said, "We've heard so much about you. Welcome to the family." After dinner, Trevor asked Paige to take a walk outside because he needed to tell her something. And they stood in his parents' backyard under the stars with their breath making little clouds in the cold November air. Trevor said, "The twins came to me back in June at their birthday party. They told me about Johns Hopkins, about the scholarship you turned down, about everything you sacrificed to raise them. And I need you to know that I see it. I see how incredible you are and what you gave up." Paige started crying and said, "They weren't supposed to know about that. I never wanted them to feel guilty." But Trevor said, "They don't feel guilty. They feel grateful, and they wanted to make sure you had what you gave them, which is a family. That's why they set us up." He took both her hands and said, "I'm in love with you, Paige, like completely head over heels, falling in love. And I know it's only been 7 months, but when you know, you know." And Paige said through her tears, "I love you too. So much it scares me because I don't want to mess this up." Trevor kissed her and said, "Then we won't mess it up. We'll just keep showing up for each other the way you showed up for those boys." And standing there in the cold with Paige in his arms, Trevor sent up a silent thank you to two scheming teenagers who'd seen exactly what their sister needed and made it happen. Trevor knew he wanted to marry Paige by December, but he also knew he needed to do this right. And that meant involving the three people who mattered most, which were Maddie and the twins. So he called Evan and Ethan during their winter finals week and said, "I need your help planning a proposal because you two started this whole thing and you should get to finish it." The twins came home for winter break with a plan that was just as elaborate as their original blind date setup. And on Christmas Eve, they told Paige they needed her to come to Trevor's house to help with a surprise for Maddie. And when she walked in the living room, all three of them were standing there holding a sign that said, "Will you marry our dad/brother-in-law?" Trevor got down on one knee right there in front of the Christmas tree with Maddie bouncing up and down next to him and the twins trying not to cry. And he said, "Evan and Ethan brought us together because they loved you enough to scheme and meddle and trick us both. Maddie loves you like you're already her mom, and I love you more than I knew I could love anyone after Jenna. Will you marry me and make this weird blended family official?" Paige was sobbing so hard she could barely get the word yes out. And the second she said it, Maddie tackled her in a hug, and the twins were cheering, and Trevor was thinking that two 17-year-old kids had somehow orchestrated his entire future, and he'd never been more grateful for meddling teenagers in his life. They planned the wedding for April 15th, which was exactly 1 year to the day after that first accidental blind date. And the twins were so involved in every detail that Paige's co-worker Nora, who was the maid of honor, said, "I've never seen groomsmen care this much about flower arrangements and seating charts." The rehearsal dinner was at a small Italian restaurant, and Evan and Ethan gave a speech that had everyone reaching for tissues. Evan said, "Most people spend their whole lives looking for someone who will sacrifice for them. Paige spent 9 years sacrificing for us before we were old enough to understand what that meant." And Ethan said, "She was 23 years old with a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins and a whole life ahead of her, and she chose two scared 8-year-old boys instead." Evan's voice cracked when he said, "We're giving her away tomorrow, but really we're giving her back to herself, giving her the life and the love she deserves after spending almost a decade giving us everything." And there wasn't a dry eye anywhere in that restaurant. The wedding day was perfect in that chaotic, beautiful way, where nothing goes exactly as planned, but it doesn't matter because the love is so obvious it fills every corner of the room. And when it came time for Paige to walk down the aisle, she had a twin on each side of her, with Evan on her left and Ethan on her right. Both of them in matching suits looking so grown up, it made Paige cry before the ceremony even started. The officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" And both twins said at the exact same time, "We do," proudly and with so much love, and they each kissed Paige's cheek before handing her off to Trevor. Maddie was the flower girl, and she took her job so seriously that she counted out exactly how many steps to take between each handful of petals. And when she got to the front, she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "I did good, right?" And the whole place laughed. Trevor's vows destroyed everyone when he said, "Your brothers tricked me into the best decision of my life by pretending I had a client meeting. You taught me that sacrifice doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding who you're meant to be. Maddie taught me my heart could grow, and Evan and Ethan taught me that love sometimes comes disguised as an elaborate teenage scheme." Paige's vows were, "You showed me that giving everything to raise the twins didn't mean I couldn't receive love back. Maddie taught me that my heart had room for more kids than I thought. And Evan and Ethan taught me that sometimes the people you sacrifice for turn around and sacrifice for you, right back by finding you a family when you didn't even know you needed one." The reception was at a garden venue, and after dinner, the twins stood up to give their official speech, and Evan started by saying, "Most people think we just set up a blind date for fun, but that's not the whole truth. We orchestrated a rescue mission for the person who'd been rescuing us for 9 years. Ethan said, "When we were 8, our parents died, and Paige was 23. She had a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins, which is one of the top nursing schools in America. Most people don't even know she got in because she never talks about it." Paige's face showed complete shock because she had no idea the twins knew about Johns Hopkins. And Evan continued, "She turned it down, moved us into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment, worked as a CNA for $12 an hour, and went to community college at night. It took her 7 years to finish a degree that should have taken 4, and she never once complained or made us feel like we were holding her back from anything." Ethan's voice was shaking when he said, "She came to every single one of our soccer games and art shows. She helped with homework even when she was exhausted from double shifts. She gave up dating and traveling and having any kind of life outside of being our mom. So when we found out she'd never had a serious relationship, we decided we needed to fix that." Evan said, "We didn't just want her to date someone. We wanted her to find someone who understood sacrifice the way she does. So we found Trevor, who was raising Maddie alone after losing his wife, and we tricked them both into meeting because sometimes you have to meddle in the people you love." Ethan said, "Trevor, you're not just marrying our sister. You're inheriting 2 overprotective college kids who will call to check in constantly and show up unannounced during school breaks." And everyone laughed through their tears. Evan got serious and looked right at Trevor and said, "Take care of her. She's spent her whole adult life taking care of everyone else. It's her turn now." And Trevor stood up and said, "I promise every single day for the rest of our lives, I've got her." And he pulled both twins into a hug while Paige sobbed happy tears. 1 year later, they were a family of 4 with Maddie now 8 years old, and the twins visiting from college every few weeks. And Paige was 5 months pregnant with a surprise baby that had everyone excited, especially the twins who argued constantly about godparent duties. Evan said, "I'm 4 minutes older, so obviously I should be the godfather." And Ethan said, "You can't pull rank for 4 minutes that you spent doing nothing." And Paige laughed and said, "You're both godfathers. There's 2 of you. You can share the job." They started a tradition of going back to Elliott Bay Cafe every April 15th to celebrate their anniversary at the same table where they'd first met. And on their second anniversary, the waiter brought over dessert with a note that said, "Happy anniversary to the couple we helped create. Thanks for letting us play matchmaker. Love, Evan and Ethan." 4 years after the wedding, Paige and Trevor sat in the audience at the University of Washington graduation ceremony, watching Evan and Ethan walk across the stage to get their diplomas. And Paige was crying so hard that Trevor had to hand her his handkerchief. After the ceremony, Evan found them in the crowd and said, "We did it. We actually graduated." And Paige said, "You did it. I'm so proud of both of you." But Ethan shook his head and said, "No, we did it. All of us together. You gave us the foundation, and we built on it. And now look at us. You've got a family, and we've got degrees, and everyone's happy." They took a family photo with all 6 of them, including Maddie, who was 12 now, and their 3-year-old son. And Paige stood in the middle, surrounded by the family that 2 scheming 17-year-old twins had built for her. Sometimes the people who trick you into something turn out to have seen exactly what you needed before you knew you needed it yourself. Trevor was set up on a fake work meeting by two teenagers and walked into the love of his life. Paige thought she was going to be alone after raising the twins for 9 years, but they made sure she had a family waiting for her. Evan and Ethan understood something that most people spend their whole lives learning, which is that the people who sacrifice everything for you deserve to have everything sacrificed back for them. They saw their sister give up her dreams to raise them, so they gave up their pride to find her love. Two teenage boys orchestrated an elaborate scheme involving fake work meetings and prepaid dinners, not as a joke, but as the most beautiful thank you anyone could give. They didn't just set up a date. They healed a heart that had spent almost a decade caring for everyone but itself. If you've ever sacrificed your dreams for someone you love, know that love has a way of coming back to you in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes through two meddling twins who refuse to let you face an empty nest alone. Hit that subscribe button if this reminded you that family takes care of family in whatever way they can. Share this with someone who's given up everything for the people they love. And remember that your sacrifice is seen even when you think nobody's paying attention. The twins were paying attention, and they made sure their sister got the fairy tale she'd given them. Thanks so much for being here with us today.